Have you ever felt completely stuck? Like you're spinning your wheels, putting in all this effort, but you're just not seeing the results you want? Well, today, we're going to dive into the system behind James Clear's incredible book, Atomic Habits. It breaks down how getting just 1% better every single day is the real secret to making huge, lasting changes in your life. Now, this whole idea, this entire philosophy, it doesn't come from some research lab or a university lecture. Nope, it starts with a moment of just shocking, random violence. Picture this. James Clear is at a high school baseball game. A classmate takes a full swing, but the bat slips from his hands, flies through the air, and hits James square in the face. And the damage was just devastating. We're not talking about a small injury here. He had multiple skull fractures, 2 shattered eye sockets, and he had to be put into a medically induced coma. At one point, he even stopped breathing. So his journey back wasn't just going to be hard. It meant he had to, quite literally, rebuild his life from scratch.
But this story isn't about some miracle one-time recovery. It's about a slow, deliberate evolution. When he got to university, Clear started putting his life back together. Not with these big, heroic goals, but with tiny, almost boringly consistent habits. Things like just keeping his room tidy, making sure he got good sleep, and lifting weights a few times a week. These were his very first atomic habits. And that whole process, that slow and steady climb, brings us to what is maybe the single most important idea in the entire book. It's not about trying to change everything overnight. The real goal is so much simpler than that. Just try to get 1% better every single day.
So why on earth does that tiny 1% matter so much? Well, it all comes down to the magic of compounding, right? Just like your money earns interest in the bank, your habits compound over time. At first, you barely notice those little improvements. Or on the flip side, those little bad habits. But you stick with them long enough, and they add up to a massive, massive difference.
And this slide illustrates it perfectly. Think about a plane flying from LA to New York City. If the pilot adjusts the heading by just 3.5 degrees, that's a tiny change you wouldn't even feel. You don't end up in New York. You land in Washington, D.C. It's a completely different destination. And that's exactly what our daily habits do to our lives.
So if it's that simple, why do we fail so often? Well, it's because we get stuck right here, in what Clear calls the Plateau of Latent Potential. It's that super frustrating time where you're doing all the right things. You're going to the gym, you're studying, you're putting in the work, but you look in the mirror and you just don't see any results yet. It feels like you're going absolutely nowhere.
But here is the key insight, the thing you have to remember. That effort is not being wasted, it's being stored. Think about an ice cube in a room. The temperature goes from 25 degrees to 26 to 31 and nothing happens. It's still just an ice cube. But then you hit 32 degrees and bam, a breakthrough. All that energy that was being stored is finally released. You just have to hang in there long enough to hit your own tipping point.
Okay, so this is where most of us get it wrong. We tend to focus on outcomes. We say, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to write a novel. Clear argues that this is backward. We should focus on our identity instead. See, the goal isn't to write a novel. The goal is to become a writer. And that little switch, it reframes everything. Instead of chasing a result, you start building an identity. You just ask yourself, what would a healthy person do right now? Or what would a writer do? And then you take these tiny little actions that prove that new identity to yourself one step at a time. All right, so if the goal is to become a certain kind of person, how in the world do we actually do it? This is where we get really practical. Clear gives us this simple but incredibly powerful framework he calls the 4 laws of behavior change. And the laws are just beautifully simple. To create a good habit, you need to make the cue obvious, the craving attractive, the action easy, and the reward satisfying. And if you want to break a bad habit, you just flip them. Make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. So law number 1 is all about the cues in your environment. A lot of our habits are just automatic responses to what's around us. So if you want to start eating healthier, don't just hide the apples in a drawer in your fridge. Put them out in a big bowl on the counter. Make the cue for the good habit totally impossible to miss. And check out the data on this slide because it is just mind-blowing. A study in Great Britain looked at 3 groups trying to exercise more. The first 2 groups, one just tracked their workouts, the other got a big motivational speech. They both had about a 35% success rate. Pretty standard. But look at that third group. The only thing they did differently was write down a specific plan for when and where they would exercise. And their success rate? It jumped to a staggering 91%. That's the power of making the cue obvious.
Okay, law 2, make it attractive.
Our brains are hardwired to chase pleasure. So you can actually use this to your advantage. Try pairing something you want to do with something you need to do. For example, tell yourself you only get to watch your favorite Netflix show while you're on the treadmill. You make the habit you're trying to build more appealing.
Law number 3 is all about making things easy. Look, we are all wired to follow the path of least resistance. It's just human nature. So if you want to start going to the gym in the morning, lay out your workout clothes the night before. Reduce the number of steps, the friction, between you and your good habits.
And this right here, this is a total game changer. It's called the 2-minute rule. Whatever new habit you're trying to start, you scale it down so it takes less than 2 minutes. So read before bed becomes read 1 page. Do 30 minutes of yoga becomes take out my yoga mat. The whole point is just to master the art of showing up.
And finally, we have the fourth and maybe most important law of all: make it satisfying. See, our brains are built for immediate gratification, so you have to give yourself some kind of small, immediate reward right after you complete your habit. It could be as simple as putting a big X on your calendar or moving a paperclip from one jar to another. That tiny little action gives your brain a hit of satisfaction that says, hey, that felt good. Let's do that again tomorrow. So those 4 laws, that's the blueprint for getting started. But how do you keep going? For months, for years? How do you actually achieve mastery? Well, this is the final piece of the puzzle. It's what really separates the amateurs from the pros.
Let's take the comedian Steve Martin. To most people, he looked like this massive overnight sensation. But the reality was a long, slow, grinding process of constant practice and refinement that took more than a decade.
Just look at this timeline. He spent over 10 years doing these little shows in small, often totally empty clubs. He was constantly experimenting, failing, adjusting his act. He just kept showing up. The wild success that everyone saw in the late 70s was built on 15 years of work that nobody saw.
And that, right there, is the ultimate lesson. At a certain point, success just comes down to who can handle the boredom of practicing something over and over again. Professionals stick to the schedule, even when they don't feel like it. Amateurs let their mood get in the way. You have to fall in love with the process itself, not just the prize at the end.
But there's one last really important thing to remember. As we build these new identities for ourselves, we have to be careful they don't become a kind of prison. Because life changes, right? A truly strong identity isn't brittle. It's flexible. It can adapt. So maybe I am an athlete eventually evolves into I am the type of person who is mentally tough and loves a challenge. The core idea is still there, even if the specifics change.
So after all that, it really just comes down to this one question. Forget about your huge, life-changing goals for just a second, and instead, just ask yourself, what is one tiny 2-minute action you can take today that casts a vote for the person you want to become? Because that, right there, that's where everything begins.